Hello, I'm Dee Hardwick and today's training session will be on the Performance Development Review. The objectives for today will be to understand the PDR process and why it's beneficial for both managers and employees to take the PDR. We will look at the preparation that is required for the review. I will go through the form and look at the different sections that need to be completed. We will discuss the overall performance rating and how you as individuals rate yourselves against each of the objectives, as well as the managers putting their own ratings against each objective. We will look at SMART objectives and how to set objectives that are SMART, and I'll explain what SMART means. We'll look at the personal development plan and what we need to do to set objectives for reaching personal goals in the coming year. I'll then look to discuss the process that takes place after the review and when mid-year reviews take place. Okay, so to understand the PDR process is an opportunity for managers and employees to meet with each other on a formal and one-to-one basis. It's important for them to discuss how they feel they have achieved against the objectives that their manager had set, what areas outside of the objectives they feel that they had met throughout the course of the year, identify any key learning that they took throughout the course of the year, which can be both classroom-based and on-the-job learning. It's important to acknowledge the steps that they took to achieve their personal development objectives, and it's important to look to the future to agree what objectives need to be set for the coming year and what personal development goals need to be set as well. Okay, so to prepare for the review, where possible, managers should complete the PDR for themselves with their manager before they conduct PDRs with their direct reports. The reason for this is it gives managers an opportunity to experience a PDR before delivering one themselves. And this will allow them to develop an awareness of their own objectives before cascading those objectives down to their team members. However, of course, this is not always possible to do, and we don't want the PDR process to be placed on hold because a manager hasn't had their PDR with their manager. So please go ahead and schedule in your PDRs with your managers and complete the form best you can and set your objectives the best you can. And those objectives can always be tweaked at a later stage once the manager has a greater awareness of the objectives that he's been set. There is some great information that is available on Horizon for the personal development review process. And I encourage you, in addition to reviewing this online training, that you go onto Horizon and spend some time going through the material there, as that will also help you complete your PDR to a high standard. Now, preparing for the PDR is important for both employees and managers. It will involve you as an employee asking managers and peers and people that you have worked with throughout the course of the year for feedback on how they feel you've performed. That feedback can be provided as evidence to support the grade that you have given yourself against the objectives that have been set and the other areas that you feel you have met and or exceeded in. Now, employees are required to complete the PDR and submit it prior to the appraisal meeting with your manager. This will enable the manager to review the information that you've included in your PDR and prepare him or herself to respond against each of the areas that you've detailed, and also include further areas that they may wish to detail as part of your PDR. Overview of the relevant sections. If you grab a PDR form, we will review section 1, which refers to the employee's job and asks them to document their objectives set from the previous year and how well they feel they have performed against these objectives. It's important that employees are specific in their write-up and give examples and supporting evidence, i.e. feedback, where appropriate. This shouldn't just be a one-liner, okay? The employee would need to document what is going particularly well in their role. For example, they should detail some key achievements that fall outside of their objectives. They would also need to document what they could have done differently. So, for example, are there any ongoing or outstanding objectives that they should review lessons learned? What steps need to be taken to enhance customer service? That kind of thing needs to be included in this section. The manager would then need to comment on each of the items raised and others that are not raised that they want to be documented as part of the PDR form, and give praise for achievements and understand and address any areas for improvement. Okay, so this slide shows the first section of the PDR form, section 1. This is what we were just referring to. So you can see my job, review the objectives from the previous year. Now what we've done here is we've included an example, and the example is to show you the detail that staff need to go into in order to support and back up how they feel they have performed against their objectives. And it shouldn't just be a one-liner in that, yes, I achieved that objective, correct, because that doesn't then show to what extent have they achieved that objective. Have they met, have they exceeded, have they fully exceeded? So an example would be to reduce recruitment costs by 10% by December 2014. So the action would be that I reviewed the terms of business with recruitment agencies and I negotiated better fee rates. I introduced a bounty scheme which resulted in us being less dependent on recruitment agencies. I subscribed to a popular recruitment website which enabled us to have access to 20,000 CVs, and as a result the recruitment costs have been reduced by 18% or X number of thousand dirhams. And you can see there that that write-up provides the manager with detail on how that objective has been met and or exceeded. Okay, the second part of this first section is what's going particularly well. So these again are areas that fall outside of your objectives, so it's really important for you to still document. An example, again, that I've provided is something that a technical services manager may say. I single-handedly fitted out a project and provide the project name so it gives it life from start to finish, within budget and within deadline, with little to no guidance from my line manager, and this gave me exposure into these areas. Now you can see that that feedback that's documented on that PDR form shows how they've met the objective, what learning took place as well throughout that process, and how they feel they exceeded the objective, because they didn't need a lot of guidance from their manager, they needed less than what's required. So they're implying there that they have perhaps met and exceeded that area of their role. Well, the final part of section 1 is what could be done differently. So these are areas where we need to reflect, to look at personal and continuous development. So an example that I've provided is that somebody could develop and update a best practice manual for estimation to ensure accuracy. Okay, so by doing that, you're improving customer service, you're improving procedures, you're not just going with the way that things have always been done, you're looking to always enhance and exceed current processes and procedures in order to improve quality output and customer service. Giving feedback during the PDR process is essential. That feedback needs to be balanced, both positive and negative. Now, giving people negative feedback is very tricky. You don't want to hurt somebody's feelings or come across too harsh, but at the same time you need to make your point and ensure that poor behaviour and underperformance isn't repeated. Preparation is key to giving effective feedback, as it's essential that feedback is given in the correct way with the right intentions to achieve a positive outcome that is focused on improvement. Giving feedback regularly, positive and developmental, as the events arise, is most effective. So too is inviting people to come up with solutions. Feedback should not be saved until the annual performance appraisal, as this would come as a shock to the employee if they're hearing it for the first time. Say what you'd like to see in the future and why. Let the other person see the bigger picture and get an understanding from your perspective. When discussing lessons learned, make sure you identify how problems can be solved. Agree on specific targets and timelines. That way, the person receiving criticism walks away with a concrete guide on how to move forward. Give the employee the chance to explain and how to fix things if possible. It's a two-way conversation. I'd like you to refer to the sample sheet provided, which gives examples on providing good and bad feedback. Now, an example of bad feedback would be saying to someone, "You talk too much and you're not focused. You need to improve in this area." Well, you can see that by saying that, it's vague, no examples are given on when this has actually occurred, and there's no recommendations for improvement. Now, to turn that around into providing it in a positive way, is that you could say, to ensure good communication and effective teamwork, we hold fortnightly team meetings. This opens the scene. During these meetings, I have found that you are easily distracted and you have a tendency to talk rather than listen. An example of this took place last week when we had a team meeting and you were whispering to your colleague Bennett and you were on the phone. These meetings were in place to provide you with updates on the team and individual progress, on key objectives, and hence it's important that I have your full attention. I therefore encourage you to switch off your phone during these meetings and leave any discussions with your colleagues until after the meeting is finished. This will improve the quality of the meeting and your individual input. Now you can see that that was a sandwich method approach. You introduced the topic in hand, which was positive. You gave the constructive feedback and you gave examples of where you saw that occurring. You advised them on how to improve and you ended up with a positive outcome on what would happen if they did take your criticism on board. Please remember that when you're giving constructive feedback, it is a two-way conversation. It's important that you give the other person the opportunity to respond. Make sure that you're asking open questions, i.e., what do you think about what you've just said? What's your view of the situation? What do you think your reaction is? Tell me your thoughts on it. Make sure that you maintain eye contact and be silent to allow the other person to respond. Okay, the next section is the personal development from last year. So this looks at the objectives that your manager set you from last year and how you met those personal development objectives throughout the course of the year. So I've again provided some examples on what would be considered a good write-up in a PDR. A document controller, for example, may say that they attended a Microsoft Office course which enhanced their knowledge and skills when using PowerPoint and Excel. As a result, I can now draft presentations more effectively, I can present reports in Excel to a higher standard. So again, the write-up isn't simply, I attended an MS Office course, it tells you how the course benefited them and how they applied that learning. Another example could be that a construction manager say that I took on the role of project lead on a specific project, which gave me exposure into these areas and experience of acting up into a senior role. So again, personal development doesn't just need to come from classroom-based training. It can be from having exposure into an area that you haven't been exposed into before, or acting up into a bigger role if you had an opportunity to do that throughout the course of the year. So these are all things that you should document in your PDR to show how you have developed throughout the course of the year. Now, a final example is that a construction manager may also put something in there along the lines of that they took the lead in delivering a presentation to a client on a certain project. The delivery of the presentation went smoothly, the client was very pleased, and they provided the following feedback. So again, there you're supporting your write-up with evidence from somebody else who also believes that you've done very well. This experience enabled me to build on my confidence and deliver presentations. So again, construction managers may not always have the opportunity to deliver presentations to clients. It may be more of the role of the project director or the project manager, and therefore if a construction manager has had this exposure, then this is great development for them. Okay, section 2 of the form looks at ISG vision and values. We all know what these are: passionate about our work, committed to customer relationships, fulfilling our people's potential, dedicated to detail, and acting responsibly and safely. Now, these visions and values apply to everybody within the company and not just the site-based personnel. Now, this is the section of the form that refers to ISG vision and values, and what I've done here is I've provided you with some examples on what we would like to see as a write-up for these areas of the form. What's key is that you don't simply agree to the values. Yes, I show passion for work, and yes, I am committed to customer relationships, but you detail how you have displayed those values in your day-to-day work throughout the course of the year, and try, where possible, to vary in your examples, because you've had a year to perform and display these values that the ISG hold key. Okay, so an example that we've detailed here to help you in your write-up is that a construction manager could say that they have a passion for work and it's reflected in their loyalty and commitment to ISG. And the example that they've provided is that for the past 5 weeks, they've been working on a project 7 days in a row to ensure that they get the project over the line and to meet the targets, and it's something that they're happy to do to take that project over the line and within the budget, and it's something that they've done on previous occasions throughout the year, also on other projects that they've worked on. So you can see there that they're not somebody who works the standard 8 till 5 and you know they won't go the extra mile to meet the deadlines and meet the objectives of that project, that they're very passionate and they want to take that project over the line as part of the team on site there. So that's a great example that can be used. Now the second column, under what I could do differently to enhance my performance, this is an area that really looks at continuous improvement. So it's not there to say, what have you done bad at, but more an opportunity on what we can do more to continuously improve ourselves and our performance in order to improve customer satisfaction. Okay, so an example I've got here is a document controller may say that they will proactively look to enhance working procedures. For example, I will review the forms that we use on a frequent basis and propose updates to those forms to make them more user-friendly. Now again, that's not something that they necessarily have to do, but if they do that, then it enhances working procedures, it enhances productivity, improves productivity, and it enhances customer satisfaction because you're doing things at a much faster and quicker and better rate than what you would be doing if you were using the same old form just for the sake of using what's there, rather than looking to see what can be improved. Our second value is committed to customer relationships. Now the example that we provided here is an example from a project manager. Now a project manager may say, I'm always looking to ensure good relations with my clients by making sure that I deliver on my promises and I deliver within the deadlines that I set for myself. I keep the client up to date with the progress of the projects and propose solutions to any problems that may arise. An example of this was on project X, where etc, etc. Okay, so be specific and give examples in your write-up. Now what we can do differently to perform is that a project manager may say, I will proactively ask for feedback from clients to ensure that we're meeting their needs and identify areas where there's still room for improvement. So you may have delivered on a project and provided great margin and the customer's being very happy, but there's nothing to stop you asking for feedback from a client to see, is there anything further that we could do to ensure that that open dialogue and open communication and feedback for continuous development. Okay, the following value is fulfilling our people's potential. Now a HSE officer may say here that I've completed my NEBOSH training, First Aid, Fire and IOSH course, which has enhanced my knowledge and skills in my role and has allowed for practical application. Okay, what can I be doing differently to enhance my performance? A senior health and safety officer may say that I will proactively look to coach and train site staff on health and safety for accident investigation or working at a height or any of the other relevant health and safety topics that are key to site personnel. And by doing that, that will enhance my confidence in presenting to others and coaching skills. Okay, so that's a great example of where a member of staff can see, in order to fulfill my potential, I need a little bit of exposure into these areas, and you would proactively look for those opportunities to display that. The following value is dedicated to detail. Now the example that we provided here is of a project manager, and they've said that we were able to close out project X 2 weeks ahead of schedule with 0 defects, 0 snagging, due to our care and attention to detail, and ensuring that we strictly adhere to best practice manual and absolute completion guidelines. Okay, so they've used the absolute completion, they've used the best practice manual to ensure that the project was delivered on time, and it's that detail that has enabled them to do that by following those manuals. Okay, so that's a good example there on how they've displayed that. How to enhance performance in this regard. A construction manager may say, I would like to better understand the QA/QC process and ensure compliance on all projects. So again, as we're growing as a business, things like QA/QC are growing more and more important to ensure that all of our projects, all of our site projects, deliver on that quality assurance and quality control. And it's not just down to one individual to understand that and deliver on that, it's down to all of us to understand that and deliver on that, and as we all play a key part. So that's a good example there of how to enhance performance in the dedicated to detail value. Okay, acting responsibly and safely. Now obviously this is an easy one for our health and safety team, but it is something that applies to everybody, both on site and based in head office. So I've given an example here of a HR officer and how they have displayed this value. Now the HR officer has said that I attended and passed my first aid training. I completed the health and safety workplace safety training module on Horizon, and I conducted first aid on a fellow colleague and adhered to correct procedures. Okay, there can be accidents in head office, people can cut their hands in the kitchen, people can trip over, anything can happen, and it's important that we all display safe working practices and we all act in a safe and responsible way, and if we are trained, that we apply that training, and that's the example that's been provided there. Okay, so it applies to not only the people that are working on site, where there's much more health and safety things that are going on around them that need to be complied with, it applies to people within head office also. Now a document controller can say that how they want to enhance their performance in this value is that they want to ensure the cleanliness of their work space to ensure a safe working environment. So they're going to make sure that there's not wires hanging out across the floor, and there's not big piles of paper that are spread out all over the table, which again in itself is a health and safety concern. Okay, so if we look at section 3 of the form, this is the overall performance rating. Now, the performance rating is scored out of 5. Now, when you are self-scoring, we need you to bear in mind what each of the scores mean and whether or not that score applies to the whole aspect of that section that you are scoring, and not just one aspect or a couple of aspects. Okay? So you can see here that a score of 5 far exceeds expectation, and on average you would really only see that 10% of the workforce would actually be qualified as a score 5, okay, and have displayed that throughout the course of the year. So not just the course of a few months, it's consistently performing it over the course of the 12 months. Now what does far exceeds expectation means? This means that somebody has far exceeded the overall performance standards for the role that they are employed to do. They have consistently exceeded performance objectives in all aspects, not just some, all aspects. They have achieved their goals with far less support or resources than what is expected or planned in their role. Now, if you have met that criteria on all of your objectives and your performance development, etc., and your values, then you would self-score yourself a 5. Okay? A score of 4 is meeting and partially exceeding expectations. Now, again, on average, you would see slightly more people falling into this category. So we would look for about 25% of our workforce to be scored a score of a 4. Now, what a 4 means is that they have exceeded their overall performance standards. They have exceeded the performance objectives in key aspects, so some, but not all. And they have required less support than expected or planned from their manager in their role. Meeting expectations score of 3. Now, this is where we would see the majority of our staff. We would expect to see at least 55% of our staff scoring themselves as a 3. Now, a 3 is a really good score. A 3 basically tells your manager and yourself that you're meeting expectations, you're doing the job that you're employed to do, you have achieved the overall performance standards in your role, you have met all of your objectives that were set, and you have required the appropriate amount of support and guidance from your manager. Okay, so that's a score of 3. So we would like to see the majority of people falling into this category. Partially meeting expectations is a score of 2. Now, on average, we would only look to see maybe 7.5% of people falling into this category. Now, these are people who have only partially delivered on the objectives that were set for them. They haven't met all of the performance standards. They've met some performance standards, but there's other areas of their role that they haven't met. And they've required a little bit more support than what is appropriate within for the job that they're employed to do. Okay, Now below expectations score a 1, again you would only see maybe 1, 2 people who are a score of 1, only 2.5% of the workforce. So these are people who have failed to meet their objectives completely. They have not met their performance standards in their role, and they have required a lot more support excuse me, at a disproportionate level than what is required. Section 4 looks at setting objectives for the future. Now these objectives need to be SMART. Now what does SMART mean? SMART is specific, they need to be clearly defined, they cannot be generic, open-ended, subject to misinterpretation. Okay, so they need to be very, very clearly defined. They need to be measurable. How are you going to measure the objective? Over which time frame? What factors are involved in the measurement process? They need to be achievable. You can't set an objective which just isn't achievable, because that objective will never be met, and it's not going to be an objective that is motivational for somebody to try and meet. It needs to be relevant to the job that the person's actually doing. You can't set an objective that has nothing to do with the job that they're doing. So please make sure that the objectives are very relevant to the job holder. And they need to be timely, they need to be time bound. You need to agree on the time frame in which the objective needs to be met. Is it going to take a whole year to achieve the objective? Is it going to take a few months? Is it going to take 6 months? Does it need to be reviewed? So these are the factors that you need to bear in mind when you're setting SMART objectives. Here's an example of a SMART objective. Now this objective is for an office manager, and the objective is to reduce office supply costs by 10%. So it's specific and it's measurable. And the target, 30th of June. So you've got a year to achieve the objective. It's achievable, it's specific, it's time bound. Now, how are you going to measure this objective? How is it relevant? So the employees agree with the manager that they will review the current office supply cost per item, renegotiate rates, research supplier options, control allocation of office supplies, define the approvals process for signing off the expenditure. If the office manager takes these steps, then they'll be able to hopefully achieve the objective that has been set. They may agree with the manager to review the objective in 6 months. So we've put down there a mid-year review date. But ultimately, the completion date is the 30th of June. So you can see there that is a specific, SMART objective that has been set. Section 5 looks at the personal development objectives that we need to set for the year ahead. Well, the section is about reviewing and understanding the development needs that our people have within the business. Employees and line managers must consider what kind of support is required to successfully achieve the objectives that have been set for them and to improve their overall performance. Managers need to be expected to discuss the employee's career aspirations. Now, development needs should be specific to the employee's role, and where appropriate, training solutions should be explored. Managers need to be specific and clear about what knowledge and skills their direct reports need to acquire or develop. The employee is ultimately responsible for meeting their training and development needs, i.e. by proactively researching, sourcing and applying for the appropriate training that meets their development needs as identified through the PDR process. This process will be supported by the Head of Department and Human Resources. Now this is an example of where we can see what an objective is like that has been set. This objective is for somebody to obtain their CIOB qualification. Okay, so it's specific. How will this method be achieved? It will be achieved through the CIOB membership department. Now this section looks at the steps that you're going to take to achieve that development objective. So the example here is that the person will review the membership sections of the CIOB website, make a determination on which route is best suited for them, contacts the membership department, who will advise on the application process, the fees, the timescales. They'll then apply for ISG sponsorship by submitting the relevant form, and in liaison with their manager, they'll identify a mentor in the business who would essentially help them throughout the modules in the course. Measurement of success, for this one it's a fairly obvious one. It's obviously passing the modules for the CIOB. They can review their progress mid-year in December, and certainly for the CIOB it will be reviewed annually and thereafter until the course is completed. Now, not all development objectives are necessarily achieved through formal external training. They can be achieved through identifying a mentor and learning from that mentor, by shadowing somebody within the business, by identifying areas that you need exposure into and agreeing with your manager when an opportunity arises that you put your hand up to have that exposure. So please bear in mind when you're setting your development objectives, they don't just need to be external courses, they can be in-house training through identifying certain people within the business or identifying opportunities within the business in order for you to meet your development objectives. During the PDR meeting, it's appropriate for you as the manager to discuss the salary review process with your direct report. Explain the process and refer them to the HR policy that they can find on the common folder I. If the individual is meeting expectations or above, they will be put forward for a review. However, if they're not meeting expectations, they're scoring a 1 or a 2, they won't be put forward for a review during this time. However, when you set them short-term objectives, if they meet those objectives within a 6-month period, they will be included in the mid-year review in December. If employees have not completed 6 months service by the time the review takes place, they will not be eligible for a review. And likewise, if they've received an increase in the last 6 months, they will not qualify for a review. Employees must still be in the employment of the company at the time when the payments are made for them to be eligible for it. If the employee already sits at the top end of their scale, then they may not receive a further increase, but what we might do is offer a discretionary one-off bonus instead, so that they can still be rewarded for their efforts throughout the course of that year. Now, it's important to remember that you as managers should not be making promises of amounts when you're discussing the salary review process. They should simply be informed that they're going to be put forward for a review with your recommendations, and those reviews will be considered by the senior management team, and there will be issued letters to confirm the outcome is appropriate. Any other questions, please direct them to the HR team. Mid-year reviews take place for staff who have been underperforming, so they're scoring a score 1 or a score 2. It's important for them to be reviewed again so that they're not just left for a whole year before they're formally reviewed. So we review these individuals in December. It's also appropriate for people to take part in the mid-year review when they've had short-term objectives set, and those objectives can be assessed at that time to make sure that they're on track and they're being achieved. They're also necessary for people to take part in the mid-year review if they didn't take part in the annual review. So these are new joiners to the business, staff who may have joined before the annual appraisal but were still in probation and hence didn't take part. So if staff fall into that category, then they take part in the December review. Finally, we're at the end of the form, and this is the section where we need to ensure that it is completed and signed off by all parties. So before that happens, the manager needs to ensure that everything is typed up, the employees' comments are in place, the manager's comments are in place, anything extra that's come out of the review meeting. The employee is asked to sign the form off. The manager is required to sign the form off. They've agreed on their overall performance score, and then we assess whether or not there is a mid-year review that needs to take place. Once that's done, the forms are then sent to HR. We review the forms, we identify any training needs that have been agreed, and we look to source the training where appropriate with the individual so that those objectives can be met. That's all. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact a member of the HR team. Thank you.